A black honor student was stopped in a luxury store, accused of stealing a jacket he hadn't even touched. The manager called security, the crowd stared, and his voice shook as he begged them to check the cameras. But when the footage played, what they saw didn't just expose the truth, it exposed something far darker. The question is, will anyone believe him before it's too late? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Watch till the end, then rate this story out of 10. Share in the comments below. Your feedback helps us bring you even better stories every single day. The hum of the fluorescent lights was the only sound in Mr. Whitman's 10th grade algebra class that morning. Pages flipped, pencils scratched, and the low buzz of half-bored teenagers filled the space like static. In the middle row, sitting quietly with his hands folded on the desk, was Malik Johnson, 15 years old, lanky, thoughtful, and too often invisible. Malik had always been the type of student teachers described as polite, reserved, and quiet. They rarely said he was bright, curious, or driven, though he was all three. He had long since learned that to many people, especially in classrooms like this one, his silence meant he didn't have much to offer. That suited Mr. Whitman just fine. Mr. Whitman was the kind of teacher who loved attention. He thrived on small performances, turning lessons into little acts of showmanship where the spotlight always circled back to him. And when the class needed a laugh, when the tension of equations grew too heavy, he had a habit of picking on the quiet ones. But he never mocked the students whose parents were on the PTA. He never singled out the kids whose families lived in the nicer parts of town. His gaze always seemed to land on Malik. That day, on a gray Tuesday morning that would etch itself into Malik's memory forever, Mr. Whitman turned from the whiteboard, marker still in hand, and scanned the room with a grin. "All right," he said, tapping the marker against his palm. "Let's shake things up. Who's ready for a real challenge?" No one answered. Heads bent over desks, eyes down, the usual high school silence. Then Mr. Whitman's eyes landed on Malik. "How about you, Johnson?" His voice carried a lightness that wasn't really light at all. "Let's see what you can do with this." He quickly scribbled a long, complicated equation across the board, clearly beyond the scope of their 10th grade textbook. It was a problem Malik recognized as something from a college-level calculus exam, the kind he'd glimpsed once when flipping through an old book his uncle had left at home. The class turned as one, their faces hungry for entertainment. Some students smirked. Others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the imbalance of what was happening. But not one person spoke up. Malik froze. He knew exactly what this was. It wasn't about the problem. It wasn't about academics. It was about him. About the teacher showing the room that Malik, the quiet black kid who never raised his hand, would stumble and fail. It was meant to be a joke. A low chuckle rose from the back of the class. "What's wrong, Johnson?" Mr. Whitman said, raising his brows. "Too tough? Just give it your best shot. We're all curious to see what you've got." The words cut deeper than their surface. "We're all curious to see what you've got." Not curiosity born of belief, but curiosity sharpened like a knife, waiting for him to trip. Malik felt the heat creep up his neck, spreading across his face. His heart thudded in his chest, each beat like a drum calling attention to his humiliation. He wanted to shrink into his chair, to disappear the way he usually did. For a moment he considered shaking his head, laughing it off, playing along with the joke. But something inside him stirred. A memory, a voice. His mother's voice. "Never let them tell you you're less than, Malik. You're more than they can see." He inhaled slowly, steadying his trembling hands against the cool metal of the desk. Around him, whispers fluttered. "He's not gonna do it. This is gonna be funny. Man, Whitman's wrong for this." Mr. Whitman leaned casually against the desk at the front of the room, arms crossed, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Malik stood. The chair scraped the floor, loud enough to draw another ripple of laughter. His legs felt heavy, but he forced them to carry him to the front. Every step was a test. Every step was a decision. Keep being invisible, or risk everything by being seen. He reached for the marker. The board loomed before him, the problem stretching across the white surface like a mountain. No one expected him to climb. He could feel the eyes burning into his back, the weight of doubt pressing down. He gripped the marker tighter, fingers slick with sweat. For a moment the world seemed to blur, the lights buzzing louder, the room fading. All he could see was the equation. The numbers, the lines. He remembered the nights spent hunched over old books, solving problems far above his grade level. Not because anyone asked him to, but because numbers made sense when nothing else did. Numbers didn't laugh at you. Numbers didn't smirk. His hand trembled as he lifted the marker to the board. The first stroke squeaked against the surface, thin and shaky. A giggle rose from somewhere behind him. And then, silence. Line by line, number by number, Malik began to write. The noise of the classroom faded. For Malik, there was only the rhythm of calculation, the steady logic that had always been his refuge. Every step of the equation unfolded with clarity. His body was tense, but his mind moved like water, flowing through each step with quiet certainty. Behind him, the smirks began to falter. The chuckles died out. Mr. Whitman's arms uncrossed slowly, his smirk softening into something else, something uncertain. Malik's breathing steadied. He didn't rush. He didn't stumble. He simply solved. When he placed the final answer on the board, the marker tip pressing hard into the white surface, he dropped his hand and stepped back. The room was silent. Not the comfortable silence of routine, but the heavy, loaded silence that follows something no one expected. Every eye was on him. Not with dismissal, not with mockery, but with something else entirely. Mr. Whitman's face was pale. His mouth parted slightly, as if words had failed him. Malik set the marker down on the tray and turned, his gaze sweeping the room. For the first time, they weren't looking through him. They were looking at him. But the silence wasn't relief. It was something far sharper. Because Malik knew what came next wouldn't be admiration. It wouldn't be applause. The silence was just the pause before the storm. And as Malik walked back to his seat, his heart pounding, he had no idea that his decision to pick up that marker, to refuse invisibility, was about to ignite a chain reaction that would spiral far beyond that classroom. But what Malik did next left the classroom in stunned silence, and nothing about his life or theirs would ever be the same again. The classroom silence still clung to Malik as he walked home that afternoon. The laughter had stopped when he solved the problem, but the echoes lingered, circling in his mind like vultures. His classmates hadn't said a word to him as he packed up his things. They had only stared, some with awe, others with resentment, and many with a blankness that stung more than mockery. Even Mr. Whitman hadn't spoken, just cleared his throat, muttered something about moving on, and shifted to the next lesson as if nothing had happened. For Malik, that was the story of his life. Things happened to him, around him, but never for him. He wasn't included, he wasn't celebrated, and he wasn't remembered. He was tolerated. That was the silent thread running through his existence. At home, things were different. His mother, Denise Johnson, saw him. She saw the sharpness in his eyes when he solved puzzles, the way he devoured library books on weekends, the late nights he spent scribbling numbers in old notebooks. She told him, over and over, "You've got a gift, baby. Don't let this world convince you otherwise." Her words were warm, but the world outside their two-bedroom apartment had a colder script for him. On the bus, people shifted away from him, clutching their bags tighter, as if 15 years of life could already make him dangerous. At the corner store, clerks followed him down the aisles with their eyes, watching his hands, never his face. In school, teachers rarely called on him, unless it was to make an example. If he answered correctly, it was luck. If he stayed quiet, it was laziness. The balance was always rigged, tilted against him. Malik had grown used to the weight of silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that pressed down until you felt invisible. He didn't fight it, at least not out loud. He carried it, because what choice did he have? That day after school, he dropped his backpack onto the kitchen chair and sat across from his mother at the worn dining table. She was still in her scrubs from her nursing shift, her hair tied back, her eyes tired but alert. She looked at him the way only she did, straight through the armor he tried to wear. "What happened today?" she asked softly. Malik hesitated. "Nothing." "Malik," she said, leaning closer. "Your nothing always means something." He exhaled, shoulders slumping. "Mr. Whitman, he made me go to the board, in front of everybody, gave me a problem I wasn't supposed to know. They laughed. All of them." His voice cracked slightly at the end. "But I solved it." Her eyes widened. "You solved it?" He nodded. For a moment her expression shifted between pride and anger. Pride at her son's brilliance, anger at the cruelty behind the setup. "And what did he say?" She pressed. "Nothing. Just went on with class like it didn't matter." Malik's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Like I didn't matter." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Don't you ever let anyone convince you you're invisible. They see you, Malik. They just don't want to admit it. Her words were a bomb, but also a burden. Because deep down, Malik wasn't sure if being seen was better than being ignored. To be seen meant to be judged, targeted, ridiculed. At least invisibility offered safety. The next morning at school, Malik could feel the shift the second he walked through the hallway. Eyes lingered on him longer than usual. Whispers trailed behind his steps. He caught fragments. That's the kid, the math thing, Whitman's class. For the first time, his invisibility had cracked, but it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure. In English class, two boys leaned over and whispered just loud enough for him to hear. Hey genius, got another trick for us? They snickered before turning away. Later at lunch, a girl from his math class stared at him for a long moment, before shaking her head as if to dismiss the thought that he'd actually done what she saw him do. That was the part that cut deepest. Not the laughter, not the whispers, but the refusal to believe. Malik had shown them something undeniable, yet denial was easier than acknowledgement. That evening, Malik sat on the edge of his bed, flipping through one of the old math workbooks he'd kept hidden. Numbers spilled across the page like familiar friends. He loved them for their honesty. 2 plus 2 was always 4, no matter who you were. An equation didn't care about the color of your skin, but the world did. He thought back to his childhood, to the countless times he'd been overlooked. In kindergarten, when he built the tallest block tower, the teacher praised the boy beside him instead. In middle school, when he wrote an essay that made his mother cry with pride, the teacher marked it as plagiarized without proof. Year after year, his brilliance was not just ignored, it was stolen, dismissed, or questioned. And now in high school, it had finally broken into the open, not because anyone gave him the chance to shine, but because a teacher thought his failure would be funny. That night, Malik overheard his mother on the phone, with her sister. Her voice was low but sharp. I'm telling you, Angie. They tried to embarrass him, set him up in front of the whole class. My baby still solved it, but that's not the point. They don't see him. They don't want to. Malik sat in the hallway, listening. The truth in her words stung, because he knew it was bigger than one classroom. It was everywhere. In the way store clerks looked at him. In the way police cars slowed down when he walked home. In the way guidance counselors pushed other kids toward advanced classes while telling him, maybe just focus on passing. The weight of silence was everywhere. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was constant. A steady erosion of his existence. Still, beneath all that, something else stirred. A quiet defiance. Because even if the world refused to see him, he knew who he was. He knew what he could do. Yet Malik couldn't shake the feeling that this time, things were different. The laughter in that classroom wasn't just another moment to carry in silence. It had marked a turning point. People were watching him now, even if for the wrong reasons. And what he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that his humiliation in that classroom hadn't stayed within those four walls. Someone had been recording. The shaky glow of a cell phone camera had captured it all. The teacher's smirk, the class's laughter, and Malik's unexpected brilliance. The clip hadn't been uploaded yet, but it would be. And when it was, Malik's life would never again return to the quiet pattern of invisibility he had always known. What Malik didn't know was that this single cruel classroom joke would pull him into a storm much bigger than he had ever imagined. The sound of laughter arrived like a physical force, a wave that pushed up from the back of the room and swept through Malik's body. It wasn't simply amusement at a misstep. It had an edge, a pattern he had come to recognize over the years. The room's reaction braided itself with memories, small, insolent slights stitched into the fabric of his life until they were almost invisible. A teacher's eye sliding past him when distributing praise, a cashier's hand hovering protectively over a wallet as he reached to pay, peers misattributing his ideas to someone else. In the present, that laughter refracted all of those moments and made each one louder, like an amplifier turned to full volume. Malik felt the eyes of the classroom as if they were physical things, sharp and pressing. For a second he considered standing down, letting the joke unfold exactly as intended. It would be so simple to bend back into the shape everyone expected of him. The boy who kept his head down and took whatever they handed him. There was safety in that anonymity. There was a kind of passive survival in invisibility. But the memory of his mother's hands smoothing the sleeve of his shirt, her worn voice reminding him of worth, pried him from retreat. He had learned early that small acts of courage were not always publicized. Yet those acts held their own private victories. The laughter had a rhythm, a punctuation. It stopped and started, a tide that retreated only to come back harder. Some faces contorted into open amusement, young mouths widening at the spectacle. Others were more subtle, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, looks of relief that someone else had become the target for their nerves. A few watched with a kind of embarrassed curiosity, the kind people have when they are unsure whether to condemn or join in. Malik catalogued these expressions like data, not because he enjoyed the work of reading people, but because for so long he had learned to armor himself with comprehension. Understanding was not the same as acceptance, but it was a tool. Inside him, the laughter rewound past present to past, threading through moments that had never been acknowledged by anyone around him. There was the time the guidance counselor suggested vocational classes for kids like him, as if the world of academic possibility had been preordained for others. There was the year his science fair entry was praised in private yet left off the school bulletin, as if his work were a clerical oversight. Each small injustice was like a paper cut, individually minor, but together they bled. They had tuned him to listen for the low-grade persistent noises of dismissal, the murmurs, the sideways glances, the half-smiles that meant someone had already decided his story. As the laughter reached its peak, a new sensation rose, an awareness of how gendered and racialized humor operated. In some classrooms, jokes were soft and communal. Here, humor carried a hierarchy, a way of announcing who belonged and who could be safely derided. Mr. Whitman's smile, so practiced, so theatrical, took on a different color under that light. The joke was not laughter at math, it was laughter at Malik's presence. It was subtle cruelty disguised as levity, a social mechanism for reinforcing a structure without appearing overtly malicious. Witnessing that had been more painful, in many ways, than a direct insult. It revealed the social scaffolding that supported the inequality, and made it look ordinary. There were other noises layered under the laughter. A phone voice, the faint mechanical click that signaled someone recording. Malik couldn't see the device from where he stood, but he could sense someone's attention translating the moment into pixels, into something that could be replayed and repurposed. That thought created a coldness that threaded through his chest. It suggested future versions of the moment. Trimmed clips on social feeds, comments disconnected from context, strangers drawing conclusions from a 2-minute fragment. The idea that his humiliation might leave the room and take on a life of its own felt like a second violation, one that could be manipulated into proof of stupidity rather than evidence of resilience. As the laughter swelled, a strange thing happened. The students who led the chorus of mockery found their cadence disrupted. Snickers faltered into silence, as Malik's face, previously a canvas for others' projections, took on the gravity of resolve. He did not speak. He did not plead. He let the silence that followed the laughter settle like dust. And then he moved. The shift was small. His shoulders straightened. His hands found the marker, but it carried the weight of a deliberate choice. He was not performing for them. He was responding to himself. The board became a place where something true could be inscribed, where the logic of symbols offered a refuge from the politics of perception. Each line Malik drew across the whiteboard was measured, precise, an assertion that intelligence was not a performance for the room, but a private, inviolable practice. The act of working through the problem was a reclamation. Numbers responded predictably. They did not blink in the face of prejudice. For Malik, the calculus of variables and integrals became a language that refused to judge him. The class watched as if witnessing an intrusion of the sacred into the profane, like a candle lit in a room that had been used to darkness for too long. Eyes widened, jaws slackened. The dynamic of power in the room began to tilt, in ways none of them could have anticipated. But the tilt did not transform everyone into allies. Some students averted their glances, uncomfortable at how their laughter had landed. A few hardened their faces into expressions of indignation, as though Malik had stolen something from them by refusing to falter. It was the way social economies recalibrate. When a person presumed to be lesser demonstrates unexpected worth, those invested in the old ledger feel destabilized. That destabilization becomes a threat that must be neutralized, sometimes with a quieter cruelty than before. Malik, who had navigated this constant calculus his whole life, felt that old, weary knowledge press against him like a tide. Beneath the immediate classroom currents, other forces began to stir. The recording device, though still small and distant, implied that the incident would migrate to phones, to feeds, to a public sphere where context was optional. Malik imagined what strangers might claim. He had been set up. He had cheated. The teacher had only been pushing him in a constructive way. The dissonance between what was true and what others would choose to believe pulsed like a distant thunder. He had seen this pattern in cases where a single frame or comment rewrote an entire narrative. The powerless were edited out, and the camera's preferred spectacle to nuance. As he worked, something unexpected slid into the edges of his view. A flicker of hesitation on Mr. Whitman's face. The teacher's theatrical composure. A tool he wielded so often cracked just enough to reveal uncertainty. It was not contrition. It was a small private recalculation. Malik noticed it, and the observation deepened the silence into a more complicated thing. The instructor who had assumed control of the scene now had to reckon with a loss of authority. That loss was not only about academic embarrassment. It was about the unraveling of a persona built on predictable hierarchies. Mr. Whitman's mask had slipped, if only momentarily, and the sight of it registered in the room like a warning. While the air hung thick with the aftermath, Malik felt something else surge through him. A fragile exhilaration at being seen entirely. Not as a caricature, not as a placeholder, but as a person capable of complicated thought. The recognition was painful and sweet at once. He had long desired acknowledgement, but what he feared was that the kind of visibility he had earned in that instant would be co-opted and weaponized against him. Visibility could be a double-edged thing. It could raise a person up or it could expose them to sharper forms of harm. And then the unexpected twist. A subtle exchange between two students, in the back. A glance that carried more meaning than 100 whispered words. One of them, someone Malik thought of as indifferent, reached into a backpack and adjusted something, an action too deliberate to be accidental. It was a small movement, but it suggested orchestration, the possibility that the moment had been prepared for an audience beyond the classroom, that somebody had intended to turn this private humiliation into a public spectacle. That thought detonated inside Malik, changing the feeling from mere embarrassment to a premeditated betrayal. The personal wound of ridicule expanded into something communal and engineered. The room retained its fixed attention on the board, but the air had changed irreversibly. Malik's hands, previously steady, betrayed a tremor now, part adrenaline, part the weight of what he had just survived. In the hush that followed his final stroke, he felt the energy of 100 judgments converging. The laughter had not merely cut, it had carved a new path, setting into motion forces that neither he nor his family could yet see fully. The small private courage that had led him to the board felt both noble and precarious, like stepping off a ledge with only faith to carry him. And then, to everyone's shock, Malik's trembling hand picked up the chalk. The marker squeaked against the whiteboard as Malik drew the first line of his solution. His hand trembled slightly, but his focus never wavered. Every number he wrote down carried more than mathematical meaning. It was a declaration, a rebuttal against the unspoken narrative that had trailed him his whole life. The classroom, moments ago alive with laughter, now sat in a stillness that was both fragile and heavy. Chairs creaked softly as students leaned forward, their amusement fading into curiosity. Some held their breath, others exchanged glances, caught between disbelief and dawning recognition. The only sound was Malik's strokes, steadying as he moved further into the problem. It wasn't just math to him. Each symbol was a memory of long nights spent hunched over library books too advanced for his grade level, whispering formulas under his breath so his mother wouldn't hear him staying up late. Each step was a silent conversation with the countless times he'd been told, directly or indirectly, that he wasn't enough. Every calculation was his refusal to fold into the box they'd tried to keep him in. At the back of the room, a phone camera lens glimmered faintly, recording without permission. Malik didn't see it, but its presence marked the difference between what was happening in that classroom and what the world outside would soon consume. To those watching through the glass of a screen later, context wouldn't matter. The full story would fracture into soundbites and comments, into distorted truths masquerading as facts. As Malik's chalk hand steadied, Mr. Whitman's smirk faltered. His posture shifted, arms uncrossing, his weight leaning slightly forward. For the first time, he seemed unsure of the performance he had staged. The laughter he had expected to ride on had withered, leaving him stranded in silence with 30 pairs of eyes watching something he hadn't planned for. Malik didn't look at him. He didn't look at anyone. His world had shrunk to numbers, and that was the beauty of it. Numbers didn't sneer, didn't doubt, didn't decide who was worthy. They were faithful to logic alone. By the time he reached the midpoint of the equation, Even the students who had chuckled the loudest were transfixed. One boy leaned forward, his mouth slightly open, as though he was seeing Malik for the first time. A girl who had rolled her eyes earlier now tapped her pen nervously against her notebook. Something was shifting in the room, an energy that no one could quite name, but everyone could feel. Still, not all were willing to surrender so easily. From the corner, a whisper drifted. Bet he memorized that. Another voice followed. Lower, yeah. Someone probably showed him before. The suspicion slid across the room like oil, clinging to ears and minds desperate to protect their old assumptions. Because admitting Malik had solved something beyond them meant admitting they had been wrong about him all along. Malik pressed forward. His chest rose and fell with deliberate breaths, steadying his pace. When he wrote the final solution, he stepped back, letting the chalk rest on the tray. The silence was absolute. He turned, scanning the room, meeting no one's eyes for long but ensuring none of them could look past him anymore. In that suspended moment, Malik felt the strangest sensation, something between victory and dread. He had forced them to see him, but the cost of visibility was something he had never truly tested before. Mr. Whitman cleared his throat, the sound cracking in the stillness. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His usual arsenal, sarcasm, wit, dismissive humor, had deserted him. He adjusted his tie and muttered, "All right, let's move on," pretending as though the entire performance he had orchestrated hadn't unraveled before him. The class shifted uncomfortably, the air taut with a tension no one could resolve. No one applauded. No one congratulated him. Instead, they sat in a limbo of disbelief and unease, because Malik's success didn't just challenge a math problem. It challenged an entire perception of who he was supposed to be. When the bell finally rang, students gathered their things quickly, their chatter carefully avoiding the moment that had just unfolded. Some glanced at Malik on their way out, others deliberately avoided his gaze, as if acknowledgement would force them to confront something about themselves. Malik packed his bag, slowly, his hands steady but his thoughts restless. He had solved the problem, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like exposure. He was used to being ignored. Invisibility, while painful, at least carried a strange safety. But now he had pierced through that veil, and the weight of being seen pressed heavy against his chest. As he stepped into the hallway, Malik overheard two voices just ahead of him. "Did you see Whitman's face? Dude looked sick." "Yeah, but Khan, you don't think he really solved that, do you? That was, like, too perfect." The words sank like stones. Malik had always known brilliance wouldn't be enough. Numbers could prove his skill, but people could twist truth into doubt. At home that evening, he told his mother only pieces of the story. He didn't describe the laughter or the whispers of disbelief, just that he had been asked to solve a problem, and he had done it. Denise listened, her eyes studying him as if she could hear everything he hadn't said. "They won't always clap when you shine, Malik," she said gently. "Sometimes your light makes them squint. But don't dim it for them." Her words comforted him, but also unsettled him, because shining in public had never been his plan. He had learned how dangerous attention could be. That night, Malik sat by his window, the city hum drifting in. He thought about the way the classroom had gone quiet, about the flicker of doubt in his teacher's face, about the whispers of suspicion that followed him out the door. Numbers didn't lie, but people did, and people would find ways to twist truth to protect their illusion. Across town, in another teenager's bedroom, the shaky video recorded from the back of the classroom uploaded onto social media. The caption was short, careless, designed to provoke. Teacher thought he'd clowned the quiet kid. Then this happened. The post was sent into the world like a spark thrown into dry grass. Malik, sitting by his window, had no idea yet that his small act of courage in front of a chalkboard was about to set fire to his entire life. And Malik had no idea that his small act of courage was about to go viral in the cruelest way possible. The night was quiet in Malik's apartment, but somewhere beyond the walls, noise was beginning to gather. He didn't know it yet. He sat cross-legged on his bed, a math workbook open before him, pencil tapping absently against the paper. The chalkboard scene from earlier replayed in his mind with uncomfortable clarity. The smirks, the silence, the way Mr. Whitman's face had gone pale. He thought the day was over, that the humiliation had ended inside that classroom. But the moment had already slipped out of his hand. At the same time, across the city, another teenager sat hunched over a glowing phone screen. The boy Darren wasn't thinking about Malik's dignity or the fallout. He only saw content, something raw, dramatic, entertaining, something that could rack up likes and shares. With careless thumbs, he trimmed the clip, added a caption, and hit upload. The caption read, "Teacher tries to clown this kid, then gets owned." No names, no context, just spectacle. Within minutes, notifications started pinging. A few classmates saw it first, laughing in group chats, tagging each other with crying emojis. Then it slipped into larger circles, friends of friends, strangers who didn't know Malik or Whitman, but recognized the timeless thrill of humiliation turned inside out. The clip spread like water seeping into cracks, invisible at first, then unstoppable. By the next morning, thousands had seen it. Comments piled in beneath the video, a swirling storm of admiration, mockery, disbelief, and cruelty. "Yo, this kid's a genius. No way he solved that. Teacher probably gave him the answer off camera. Man handled the problem like it was nothing. That he just memorized it, don't hype him up. Why do they always act surprised when one of them is smart?" The words one of them cut through like shards of glass. Malik wasn't reading these comments yet, but they were already shaping the narrative about him. Strangers who had never heard his name were reducing him to a stereotype, an example, an argument in someone else's debate. By lunchtime at school, the video had already reached teachers' phones. Students whispered and snickered when Malik walked past. He felt eyes on him heavier than ever before, the weight pressing against his back, as though every hallway had become an arena. A few kids clapped mockingly when he entered the cafeteria. Others jeered, "Do another trick, Einstein." Malik kept his head down, tray in hand, but the noise followed him. He sat at his usual table in the corner, alone, trying to ignore the laughter echoing from screens. It didn't stop at school. Local community pages picked it up by evening. Parents shared it, some praising him as a role model, others critiquing the teacher, but many comments twisted into darker shapes. Anonymous users posted slurs, memes sprouted, using his face frozen at the chalkboard with captions like, "When you surprise them by knowing how to add." Malik's mother, Denise, stumbled upon the video by accident. She was scrolling through her Facebook feed, after work, when she froze at the sight of her son's face. For a moment, pride surged. He had shown them, proved them wrong. But as she read the comments, the pride curdled into dread. She saw how quickly people tore him apart, turning his courage into ammunition for their prejudice. That night, Denise sat Malik down at the table. She placed her phone between them. The video paused on his face mid-solution. "Baby," she said carefully, "did you know about this?" Malik frowned, shaking his head. "No. What is it?" She pressed play. He watched in silence, his stomach tightening as he realized someone had been filming. Watching the classroom through another lens made it worse. It wasn't just memory anymore. It was proof, but a kind of proof that could be twisted. "People are sharing it everywhere," Denise said, her voice tight. "It's out there now." Malik leaned back, rubbing his forehead. "Why would someone post this?" "Because they don't see you as a person, Malik," Denise said softly. "You're a story to them, something to argue about, to laugh at, to use." Her words landed like stones. He wanted to disappear, to erase the footage, to crawl back into the invisibility he used to resent. But invisibility was gone now. In its place was exposure, raw, merciless, unasked for. By the next day, the school administration had taken notice. Mr. Whitman tried to downplay it, insisting he had only been challenging Malik, not mocking him. His version of events spread among staff, a carefully curated narrative designed to shield himself from accountability. But the video told a different story, one he couldn't fully control. And yet, people found ways to excuse him. Some said the video was misleading. Others argued the laughter wasn't about Malik, but about the absurdity of the problem. The truth became slippery, malleable, bent by whoever held the loudest voice. Meanwhile, Malik bore the brunt of it. On the bus, strangers whispered his name. At the store, someone recognized him and smirked, saying, "Hey, it's the math kid." Online, faceless accounts told him he was a fraud, that he should go back where he came from, that he was just a fluke. One night, scrolling through the comments despite his mother's pleas not to, Malik stopped cold at a message that made his chest ache. "This kid ain't smart. They just feel sorry for him because of what he looks like." It wasn't the harshest comment. It wasn't even the cruelest. But it captured exactly what Malik feared most, that no matter how hard he worked, no matter what he proved, people would always see his skin before his mind. That was the knife. Denise found him staring at the screen, his eyes glassy. She pulled the phone gently from his hands. "Don't let them write your story," she whispered. "That's yours. Only yours." But Malik wasn't sure, because stories once released into the world rarely belong to their owners anymore. The following week, a local news station picked up the clip. A polished anchor introduced it as an inspiring story of a student surprising his teacher. They played the video with upbeat music, cutting out the laughter, muting the tension, polishing the cruelty into a heartwarming narrative. Malik watched it on television that evening, his stomach turning. The story wasn't inspiring, it was painful. But pain didn't trend, pain didn't sell, inspiration did. They had taken his humiliation, his fight to stand tall, and repackaged it into something palatable for viewers. For the first time, Malik understood the depth of what he was caught in. This wasn't just a moment anymore, it was a machine. But the viral fame Malik received was not the celebration he hoped for. It was a storm that nearly destroyed him. The first few days after the video went viral were a blur for Malik. Everywhere he went, people whispered, pointed, or stared. Some smiled as if proud of him, others smirked as though in on a joke he wasn't aware of. By now, the clip had millions of views across different platforms. On the surface, it looked like success, people calling him a genius, sharing his face, tagging his name with hashtags like Math Kid and Future Einstein. But Malik quickly learned that every word of praise carried a shadow. At lunch, a group of students passed his table, one of them sneering, "Hey Einstein, bet you cheated." Another chimed in, "Yeah, he probably Googled it." Laughter followed, sharp and cutting, the same as the classroom that day. No matter how loudly the internet called him brilliant, the voices around him still found ways to pull him back down. Online, it was worse. Comments poured in beneath the video, and its countless reposts. "Kid's smart, no doubt. Nah, no way he solved that on the spot. Staged. Why they acting like he's special? It's just math." That his teacher gave him the answer before class. Another case of people overhyping because of what he looks like. Let's be real. And buried among the disbelief were slurs, ugly, hateful words that stripped away his humanity in a single line. Malik read them once, then again and again, as if the repetition might make them less sharp. But it did. For every one message of encouragement, 10 more dripped with venom. People mocked his skin, his hair, even the way he held the chalk. They called him names that had nothing to do with math, nothing to do with intelligence, and everything to do with centuries of prejudice. Malik had been invisible before, but now that the world saw him, it was determined to tear him apart. At home, Denise tried to shield him. She begged him not to read the comments, to stay off his phone, to let the storm pass. But Malik couldn't stop. Something about the ugliness drew him in, like poking at a bruise to see how deep the pain went. One night, he sat on the couch, scrolling until the glow of his phone blurred his eyes. Denise came in, plucking the device gently from his hands. "Malik, enough," she said firmly. "They hate me, Mom." His voice cracked, raw and small. "They don't even know me, and they hate me." Denise sat beside him, pulling him into her arms. "They hate what they don't understand. They hate what proves them wrong. That's not your burden to carry." But Malik shook his head. "It is, though, because they'll never believe me. No matter what I do, they'll always say it's fake, that I don't deserve it." His words hung heavy in the air, and Denise had no immediate reply. Because deep down, she knew he wasn't wrong. Back at school, the administration remained silent. Not a word of acknowledgement. No statement about the video. No effort to protect Malik from the whispers and the taunts. Mr. Whitman walked the halls the same way he always did. Posture straight, smile thin, as though nothing had happened. When asked by curious students, he brushed it off, saying, "It was just a lesson. People are blowing it out of proportion." The lie spread faster than truth. Some teachers even repeated it, telling students that Malik hadn't been mocked, that the internet was twisting the story. Malik heard these conversations through the grapevine, each one cutting deeper than the last. The truth was in the video, clear as day, but people bent it anyway. Numbers didn't lie, but people did. And then came the messages that blurred the line between digital and real. DMs flooded Malik's social media accounts. Some begged him for tutoring, others insulted him outright. One anonymous message read, "We're watching you. Don't think being some internet star makes you better than anyone else." Malik deleted it quickly, but the word stuck. "We're watching you." It sounded less like mockery, more like a threat. Denise noticed the change in him. He ate less, slept restlessly, and spent hours sitting in silence, staring at nothing. His once quiet confidence, the spark she had worked so hard to nurture, seemed to dim. "Baby, don't let them win," she whispered one night as she tucked a blanket around him. "They want you broken. Don't give them that." Malik nodded, but he wasn't sure how much longer he could hold himself together. The twist came a week later, when the local news station decided to celebrate him. Malik's heart should have swelled with pride, but instead he felt dread, because the segment wasn't about him. It was about their narrative. The anchor smiled warmly into the camera. "A local student is inspiring the internet after a viral video shows him solving a tough math problem in class. Some say he could be the next Einstein." They played the clip but cut it carefully. They muted the laughter, trimmed Mr. Whitman's smirk, and showed only Malik's calm writing on the board. They stripped the pain, the context, the racism. In its place, they presented a sanitized version of events, a heartwarming feel-good story for viewers to consume between commercials. Watching it on TV that night, Malik felt sick. "That's not what happened," he whispered. "They're lying." Denise put a hand on his shoulder. "They're protecting themselves," she said quietly, "and they're using you to do it." Malik's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. The anchor smiled again, wrapping up the segment with a line that burned into him. "It just goes to show sometimes brilliance comes from the most unexpected places." Unexpected. The word twisted in his chest. Why was it unexpected that he could be brilliant? Why was his success always framed as an anomaly, instead of a possibility? And in that moment, Malik realized something chilling. The world didn't celebrate him. The world celebrated the story it wanted to tell about him. And when the local news picked up the story, Malik's life took an even darker turn. The news segment replayed in living rooms across the city, looping Malik's face again and again, but with none of the pain that had been in that classroom. In his own home, the television glow flickered across Malik's tired eyes. He turned the volume down, unwilling to hear another anchor call him the boy who shocked his teacher. That wasn't the truth. It was a lie dressed up as inspiration. But outside their apartment walls, the story was no longer his to control. It had already taken on a life of its own, rippling through his neighborhood, through schools, through barbershops and churches. On the corner near the grocery store, men gathered and debated heatedly. One of them, an older man in a worn cap, clapped his hands together. "That boy showed them. About time somebody proved we're more than what they expect." Another man shook his head, voice low and cautious. "Yeah, but this kind of attention? It don't end good. They'll come for him harder now. You know how it goes." At church that Sunday, whispers followed Malik and Denise as they entered. Mothers pulled their children closer, telling them, "That's the boy I told you about, the one who stood up in class." A few smiled proudly, as if Malik belonged to all of them, but others exchanged nervous glances, muttering that this was the kind of story that painted a target on a family. Even in the neighborhood grocery store, Denise felt the divide. Some greeted her warmly, telling her how proud she must be. Others offered only tight-lipped nods, eyes flicking toward Malik with a mixture of pity and warning. For Denise, the pride and fear tangled inside her chest, pulling her in opposite directions. She wanted to hold her son up as a shining light, proof of everything she'd worked for, every double shift, every sacrifice. But she also wanted to wrap him in invisibility, shield him from the sharp edges of a world that would not forgive his brilliance. At home, the conversations grew heavier. Malik sat at the dining table with his head down, scrolling through his phone, while Denise tried to hide her trembling hands as she folded laundry. "They're talking about you everywhere," she said gently. "I know." His voice was flat. "Some of them mean well." He looked up, eyes burning. "And some of them don't." Denise sighed, setting the laundry aside. "I just don't want you to let their words sink into you." "They already have," he admitted. She reached for him, but he leaned back in his chair. "It doesn't matter what I do, Mom. They're always gonna twist it. I solved the problem, but people are still saying I cheated, still saying I don't belong in those classes. How do I fight that?" Her throat tightened. She had no easy answers, only the weight of her own memories, of job interviews where she was dismissed before a word left her mouth, of hospital patients who refused to let her touch them. She knew Malik was right. His brilliance didn't insulate him. It exposed him. The community's reaction only deepened the split. Local leaders wanted to use Malik's name in their speeches, framing him as a symbol of perseverance. Activists pointed to his story as proof of systemic bias in education. Parents from wealthier neighborhoods, however, wrote letters to the school board, complaining about distractions and misrepresentations. The battle wasn't just about Malik anymore. It was about race, dignity, and who got to decide whose story mattered. Malik began to feel himself disappearing again, this time under the weight of being turned into a symbol. People weren't looking at him as Malik Johnson, a 15-year-old kid. They were looking at him as the math prodigy, the black student who embarrassed his teacher, the boy in the viral video. He belonged to everyone and no one. One evening, Denise's sister Angie came over. She sat at the table with them, her voice sharp with worry. "Denise, you need to think about what this is doing to him. He's just a boy. All this attention. It's too much." Denise pressed her lips together. "What am I supposed to do, Angie? I can't stop the world from talking about him." "You can protect him," Angie shot back. "Keep him off the internet. Talk to the school. Something." Malik listened quietly, his hands clenched under the table. Finally, he spoke. "It doesn't matter what you do. They already made up their minds about me." The room fell silent. His words were heavy, not with anger, but with resignation. That night, Denise lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her son's voice echoed in her mind. She wanted to believe she could shield him, but the truth was clearer every day. Malik was standing in a storm she couldn't pull him out of. And the storm was growing. Because while the neighborhood debated, while the internet raged, something else was happening quietly behind closed doors. At the school, administrators huddled in conference rooms, papers spread across tables, legal advisors whispering strategy. Their concern wasn't Malik's well-being. It wasn't the racism he had endured, or the cruelty of the classroom laughter. Their concern was the school's reputation. Emails circulated late at night, talking points crafted carefully. The teacher never intended harm. The problem was designed as a challenge. The situation has been exaggerated by online commentary. Malik's truth was an inconvenience. And inconvenience in institutions was always something to be managed, not confronted. The boy who had once been invisible was now a spotlight they wanted desperately to dim. But behind closed doors, school officials were already plotting to silence Malik's story before it damaged their reputation further. The whispers in the neighborhood were nothing compared to the hushed conversations inside the school's conference rooms. Administrators sat around polished tables, eyes tired but sharp, their language clinical and rehearsed. Malik's name appeared not as a child but as a situation, an issue, a problem of optics. To them, his story wasn't about dignity or racism. It was about liability. By the time Malik returned to class the following Monday, the machinery of reputation management was already grinding. Flyers praising academic rigor appeared in the halls. Teachers received emails reminding them to frame classroom moments positively, if approached by parents or reporters. But the unspoken message was clear. The incident with Malik was to be reframed, softened, and buried. When Malik walked into math class, Mr. Whitman's demeanor had shifted. His smirk was gone, replaced with a studied calm. He greeted Malik with a pointed, almost exaggerated warmth. "Good morning, Malik," he said, loud enough for the whole class to hear. It was the kind of politeness that wasn't sincere. It was strategic. The students glanced at one another, sensing the oddity but saying nothing. Malik only nodded and slid into his seat, suspicion prickling at him. 2 days later, Malik was summoned to the principal's office. Denise accompanied him, sitting stiffly beside her son in chairs too low beneath the oversized desk. The principal, Ms. Harrington, smiled thinly. "Malik," she began, "we just wanted to check in. We know the last few weeks have been overwhelming." Denise leaned forward. "Overwhelming because your teacher humiliated him and the whole world saw it," she corrected.
Ms. Harrington's smile didn't falter, but her eyes sharpened. "I think it's important to clarify. Mr. Whitman didn't intend humiliation. He wanted to challenge Malik, to push him academically. It's unfortunate how the video was edited. It doesn't tell the whole story."
Malik stared at her, disbelief tightening his chest. He finally found his voice. "That's not true." He laughed. Everyone laughed. The principal's tone was patient, patronizing. "Sometimes things can feel one way in the moment, Malik, but when we look at the bigger picture, it's different. The media has a way of twisting events." Denise slammed her palm lightly against the desk. "Don't twist this, Miss Harrington. I've watched that video a dozen times. I saw the way Whitman smirked. The way the kids laughed at my son. Don't you dare tell him he imagined it. The air in the office grew tense. The principal folded her hands. We want to avoid further escalation. For Malik's sake. For the school's sake. It would be best if we present a unified story. That Mr. Whitman was simply encouraging a student with potential. Malik's stomach churned. His truth, so raw, so undeniable, was being cut apart and stitched into something else. He was no longer invisible. He was worse. He was being rewritten. That week, the school released an official statement. It praised a remarkable student demonstrating advanced mathematical ability, and a dedicated teacher committed to challenging young minds. The words were hollow, but the intent was clear: erase the humiliation, sanitize the racism, and protect the institution. The reaction was immediate. Local parents flooded comment sections, divided. Some bought the narrative, echoing, "See, it was all positive." Others, especially those who had seen the raw video, called it out as spin. Malik read the statement himself, his hands shaking. It felt like betrayal printed in black ink. At school, the statement gave cover for whispers to grow. Students repeated the new narrative, parroting adults. It wasn't that bad. He was just trying to help. Malik walked the halls, surrounded by false versions of his own story. It was like living inside a lie. One afternoon in the library, Malik overheard two teachers talking. "Poor kid," one whispered. "Poor? He's lucky. He's famous now. He should be grateful." Grateful. The word lodged in Malik's throat, like a stone. At home he sat with Denise, his voice cracking. "They're saying I should be grateful, Mom. Grateful for being mocked. Grateful for being doubted. How does that make sense?" Denise pulled him close. "It doesn't, baby. It never will. That's the trick. They twist the truth until you start questioning yourself. But you know what happened. I know what happened. Don't let them steal that from you." But even as she said it, she knew how dangerous the tide was. Institutions had money, lawyers, polished statements. Malik had only his truth. The unexpected twist came later that week. Malik thought he was alone in the cafeteria when a soft voice spoke behind him. "I saw what they did to you," the voice said. He turned. It was Miss Carter, the history teacher known for being quiet, reserved, someone who rarely tangled with administration. She sat across from him, lowering her voice further. "The board's rewriting your story. They're protecting Whitman, because he's been here 20 years. But I've seen this before. You're not the first student he's humiliated." Malik's eyes widened. "You mean, he's done this to other kids?" Miss Carter nodded, her expression tight. "Mostly kids who look like you." She glanced around the cafeteria nervously. "They'll try to bury it. They'll try to bury you. But I'm not going to let them. If you're willing, I'll help you tell the truth." For the first time in weeks, Malik felt a flicker of something that wasn't despair. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the sense that maybe he wasn't entirely alone. But just when Malik felt cornered, an unexpected ally appeared, willing to risk everything to expose the lies. The day after Miss Carter approached Malik in the cafeteria, something in the air at school felt different. It wasn't loud or obvious, but Malik noticed the way conversations seemed to shift when he entered the room. Whispers cut off mid-sentence. Eyes flicked toward him, then quickly away. He couldn't tell if it was curiosity, judgment, or fear, but it was movement, and he had learned that movement always meant something was stirring beneath the surface. Miss Carter had kept her word. That evening she reached out to Denise, sitting at their kitchen table, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. She laid it out carefully. "Whitman has a history," she said quietly. "I've taught alongside him for years. I've seen the way he treats certain students, always the same kind, the ones who don't look like the kids in the brochures they send to donors." Denise frowned, folding her arms. "Why hasn't anyone said anything?" "Because," Miss Carter replied, her eyes lowering, "Whitman is protected. He's been here 20 years. He's connected to the board. Parents complain, but the school finds ways to make it disappear. Students remember, but by the time they leave, no one listens anymore. This video," she hesitated, glancing at Malik. "It ripped the curtain down. Now everyone sees what some of us have always known." Malik listened in silence, his stomach twisting. It was one thing to feel targeted, another to realize it was part of a pattern. The cruelty he had experienced wasn't an accident. It was a habit Whitman had perfected. That week, the murmurs began to spread through the community. Parents gathered outside classrooms, exchanging stories. He embarrassed my daughter, in front of the whole class. My son said he used to make comments, said he'd never be more than a bench warmer in life. I went to the board once about him, and they told me I misunderstood. The whispers carried a painful weight. Proof that Malik's story wasn't an isolated moment. It was the crack in a dam that had been holding back years of quiet injustice. At school, students began recalling incidents that had slipped beneath the radar. One remembered Whitman chuckling when a black student mispronounced a word, and saying, "That's why reading's important." Another recalled how Whitman always seemed to randomly select the same kinds of kids for ridicule. Individually, the memories had been brushed aside, but now, in the shadow of Malik's viral video, they started to pile up. The mask was slipping. But with the mask slipping came consequences. Whitman was no fool. He doubled down on his performance. Greeting students warmly, smiling for parents, offering extra help sessions, as though he were a model of encouragement. In class, he even praised Malik once, saying, "See, I knew you could do it." The words were sugar, but Malik could taste the poison underneath. The more Whitman pretended, the angrier Malik felt. It was as if the teacher were rewriting history in real time, gaslighting not just him but the entire classroom. And worse, some people were buying it. Late one night, Denise received a phone call from a number she didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was apparent, hushed, and urgent. "My child had issues with Whitman too," the woman said. "But when we tried to file a complaint, the board threatened to say our son was disruptive. They twisted it around on us. Be careful. They'll do the same to Malik." Denise's grip on the phone tightened. "Are you saying they'll come after my son?" "They'll protect Whitman at all costs," the parent warned. "Mark my words." Denise hung up, her hands trembling. She looked at Malik, sitting at the table with his notebook open, trying to study as though the world wasn't crumbling around him. For the first time, she felt the weight of the impossible choice pressing against them. Silence or survival, truth or retaliation. And then the twist arrived. A local journalist reached out. She had seen the video and heard the growing whispers. She wanted to do a story, not the sanitized feel-good version the news had already run, but the raw truth. "People need to know what's really happening in that school," she said during a call. "But Malik and your family would have to go on record. It won't be easy. Once this story runs, there's no turning back." Denise's chest tightened. She had spent years teaching Malik how to survive by staying out of sight. And now the world was asking him to step into the light. Not just for himself, but for everyone who had been ignored before him. That night, Malik lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. His mind raced. Speaking up meant telling the world what Whitman had done. Pulling back the mask for good. But it also meant exposing himself and his mother to backlash, to threats, to a system built to protect the powerful and silence the vulnerable. The next morning at breakfast, he finally spoke. "Mom," he said quietly, "what if telling the truth just makes things worse?" Denise looked at him, her eyes heavy with love and fear. "Sometimes, baby, worse is what comes before better. But only you can decide if you're ready for that fight." Malik dropped his gaze to the floor. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible anymore. And yet the weight of being seen felt heavier than anything he had ever carried. The teacher's mask was cracking. Yes, but cracking it open fully would require Malik to risk everything. Malik had to decide stay silent for safety, or speak up for justice, even if it cost him everything. A decision weighed on Malik like a stone lodged in his chest. Speak up and risk everything, or stay silent and watch the truth sink beneath polished lies. While administrators crafted statements and the internet argued about his worth, Malik sought refuge in the one place where noise couldn't reach him: numbers. Every night after homework and dinner, he sat at the dining table, with worn notebooks, solving equations with the same focus a boxer brought to the ring. His pencil moved quickly, his mind untangling patterns most adults wouldn't recognize. The quiet rhythm steadied him, pulling him away from the chaos of school politics and online storms. This wasn't new. His brilliance hadn't been born in that humiliating classroom moment. It had been there all along, waiting in the margins. As a child, he'd play with numbers the way others played with toys. He would line up cereal boxes and count the ratios of letters and their names, break apart phone numbers into prime factors, whisper multiplication tables in the dark as if they were prayers. His gift wasn't sudden. It was cultivated in silence, ignored because nobody cared enough to see. The irony bit deep. What Whitman had mocked him for, what the school board had tried to bury, was the very thing that gave him power. But power, Malik understood, wasn't always protection. In America, black brilliance had a way of being stolen, dismissed, or weaponized against the very people who carried it. For every moment of recognition, there were 10 more of suspicion. Denise noticed his late nights, the stack of notebooks growing taller each week. One evening she leaned against the doorway, arms folded, watching him scribble. "You don't ever stop, do you?" she asked softly. Malik looked up, half smiling. "It's the only place that makes sense. Out there," he gestured vaguely toward the world beyond their apartment. "People lie, numbers don't." She walked over, brushing her hand against his curls. "They can try to cover you up, but they can't erase what's already in you." Malik lowered his eyes. "But what if it doesn't matter? What if I'm just proving myself for nothing?" Denise crouched beside him, her voice steady. "It matters because you're not proving it for them. You're proving it for yourself." Her words stuck with him, though doubt still gnawed. At school, the debate over his worth continued like an echo chamber. Some students now sought him out, asking for help with homework, as though his viral moment had transformed him into a living cheat code. Others mocked him louder than before, bitter that his shine made them look small. Teachers were split, some quietly rooting for him, others pretending not to notice him at all. Whitman kept playing the role of supportive mentor, as if the video had been nothing but a misunderstanding. Then came the twist. Miss Carter approached him after class one afternoon, her voice low. "Malik, I signed you up for something. An academic competition, regional level." Malik froze. "You what?" She smiled faintly. "You belong on that stage, not hidden in the corner of a classroom. This is a chance to show it." Denise was hesitant when she heard the news. "Are you sure this is safe? They've already dragged your name through the mud. Competitions like this, they're not always fair. You know how they look at us." Malik's voice was quiet but firm. "If I don't try, they win. If I do, at least it's me deciding." The weeks leading up to the competition became a test of more than just skill. Malik buried himself in preparation, solving problems at a pace that left even Ms. Carter astonished. She watched him during practice sessions, whispering to herself, "They really tried to bury this." But the world outside wasn't quiet. Online, arguments still raged. One side called him a prodigy, the other dismissed him as a fraud. Local parents whispered in PTA meetings, some rallying to his defense, others lobbying to remove him from the school entirely. Claiming the disruption was too great, Whitman remained untouchable, his reputation carefully protected by the administration. And through it all, Malik kept solving, the pages of his notebook filling faster than ever. The night before the competition, Malik sat with Denise at the table. His hands shook as he sharpened pencils, his nerves raw. "You're not just solving math tomorrow," she said, her eyes locked on his. "You're solving the question they keep asking without saying out loud." Malik frowned. "What question?" "If a boy like you belongs there," she said quietly. Her words hit harder than any insult he'd read online. Because deep down, Malik knew it was true. The competition wasn't just about numbers, it was about belonging. And belonging was the one equation he'd never been able to solve. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside. For once the numbers didn't bring peace. They swirled chaotically in his mind, tangled with images of Whitman's smirk, the board's lies, the comments online. The fear wasn't of losing, it was of being told again that no matter what he did, he'd never truly be accepted. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a quiet fire. Because Malik knew the truth. Genius wasn't what they gave you. Genius was what they couldn't take away, no matter how hard they tried. And soon, an academic competition would test not just Malik's skill, but his right to belong. The weeks leading up to the competition revealed a painful truth Malik hadn't expected. Support was fragile, conditional, and often self-serving. At first, people surrounded him with encouragement. Students clapped him on the back. Parents stopped Denise at the grocery store to say how proud they were. But as the backlash against Malik grew louder, those same voices began to fade, retreating into silence or worse, turning against him. Malik noticed it first in the hallways. Classmates who used to wave now averted their eyes. A few whispered when he passed, their voices hushed but sharp enough to pierce. "He's too full of himself now. I heard he only got into that competition because of pity." What had once been applause curdled into envy, into the old poison of doubt. Even some of the teachers who had offered smiles at first became cautious. Malik overheard one telling another, We shouldn't get involved. It's too political now. Too political. Those words stung most of all. His dignity, his truth, his very existence had been reduced to a liability people didn't want to touch. Worse still were the so-called allies who tried to use him. A local activist group approached Denise, eager to make Malik the face of their campaign. They wanted him at rallies, in photos, holding signs, but when Denise asked if they would protect him from the threats and harassment he was facing, the organizers hesitated. They wanted Malik's image, not his well-being. Denise refused, but Malik saw the way people looked at him afterward, like he was ungrateful, like he owed them his pain. Even friends began to falter. Jamal, a boy Malik had known since middle school, used to sit with him at lunch every day, but after the video went viral, Jamal started drifting away. At first it was excuses. Sorry man, I gotta sit with them today for a project. Then etiquette avoidance altogether. Malik caught him laughing with others, repeating the same jokes that used to sting them both. When Malik finally confronted him, Jamal shrugged. Bro, it's just jokes. Don't take it so serious. Malik's chest tightened. It is serious. You know what this feels like. Jamal looked away. Yeah, but I don't want people coming after me too. That was when Malik understood. Even those who knew his pain sometimes chose self-preservation over solidarity. The whispers spread beyond school. Online, accounts that once celebrated him now accused him of arrogance. He's letting the attention get to his head. I liked him better before he got all this hype. Strangers debated his worth as if he were a case study, not a person. One night, scrolling through the comments despite knowing better, Malik stumbled on a thread that made his stomach drop. A classmate he had considered friendly had posted, "Look, I was in that class." He only solved it because he practiced it before. Whitman wasn't trying to embarrass him. People are exaggerating. The words hit like a slap. Betrayal always came sharper when it wore a familiar face. Malik threw his phone down, pacing the room. They're lying about me now. People I thought had my back. Denise sat him down, her voice calm but firm. Not everyone who cheers for you is in your corner, Malik. Some clap because they love you, some because they want to use you, and some because it makes them look good. But when things get heavy, that's when you learn who's real. Malik nodded, but the ache didn't leave, because for every truth his mother spoke, he felt the sting of abandonment in his chest. The twist came days before the competition. Miss Carter, the teacher who had stood by him, pulled Malik aside after class. Her expression was troubled. Malik, she said softly, I need to tell you something. The board is meeting again tomorrow. There's talk of pulling you from the competition. Malik's breath caught. What? Why? They're saying it's too controversial, that letting you compete would draw too much attention to the school. Some of the same people who praised you in public are now pushing behind closed doors to silence you. Malik's fists clenched at his sides. So they want to bury me again. Just like always. Miss Carter's eyes softened. I'll fight for you, but I want you to be prepared. This is bigger than math now. It's about power. That night, Malik sat in silence, staring at the ceiling as Denise folded laundry nearby. The weight pressed heavier than ever before. His so-called allies were vanishing one by one, their cheers replaced with whispers, their promises hollow. He was left exposed, vulnerable, with only his mother and a few rare souls still standing by him. But the worst was yet to come. Because betrayal was painful when it came from classmates, from strangers, even from community leaders. But nothing compared to the blow Malik would feel next. And then came the ultimate betrayal from someone Malik never thought would hurt him. The days that followed felt like they were moving both too fast and unbearably slow. The academic competition was only weeks away, and every second mattered. Malik knew that his performance there could either cement his place as more than the caricature they tried to paint him as, or crush him under their laughter all over again. He studied relentlessly, his notebooks filling with equations, solutions and scribbled thoughts at all hours of the night. Miss Carter came over twice a week after school, sliding practice questions across the desk, watching him work them out step by step. Sometimes her eyes softened as though she were seeing something sacred unfold. Like watching a boy wrestle not just with numbers but with the weight of history. But preparation came with shadows. Letters began to appear in their mailbox, unmarked, filled with venom. Stay in your place, quit while you can. One note scrawled in jagged ink read, if you show up you'll regret it. Denise tried to keep them from Malik, tucking envelopes into the trash before he could see. But one afternoon he pulled out the mail himself and found one. His stomach dropped as he read the words, his hands shaking. "They hate me this much for math?" he whispered. Denise's face tightened, her voice steady but trembling underneath. "It's not about math, baby. It never was. It's about you daring to step outside the box they built for you." Still, Malik kept studying, because every hateful word only sharpened his determination. He had learned that silence kept him safe, but visibility gave him power, even if that power came at a price. The sabotage grew bolder. His locker was vandalized one morning, spray-painted with a word he couldn't bring himself to repeat. Books were torn, pages ripped out. When he reported it, the administration responded with shrugs. "We don't know who did it. Try not to escalate things further." Escalate. The word rang bitterly in Malik's head, as though simply existing, simply daring to succeed, was already considered a provocation. Even his closest circle wasn't safe. Jamal, the friend who had already distanced himself, spread another rumor that Malik had been secretly tutored for months, that the competition was rigged in his favor. Malik confronted him one last time. "Why are you doing this?" Malik demanded, his voice breaking. Jamal's eyes flickered with guilt, but he masked it quickly. "I can't have people coming after me because of you, man. I'm sorry, but I gotta look out for myself." Malik stood frozen, the sting sharper than any insult from strangers. Betrayal was a wound that cut deepest when it came from someone you once trusted to stand beside you. Through it all, Ms. Carter reminded him, greatness isn't built in comfort, it's forged under pressure. They'll throw everything at you because they're terrified of what happens if you win. Denise, too, carried her own fear in silence. She double-checked locks, kept the curtains drawn, and walked Malik to the bus stop when she could, though she tried not to let him see her hands tremble. One night, when she thought he was asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and whispered to herself, "Lord, just get him through this. Please just get him through this." The days blurred into a cycle. School, harassment, study, exhaustion. Malik sometimes questioned if it was worth it, if maybe retreating into invisibility would be easier. But then he would hear his mother's voice, or Carter's encouragement, and he would return to the page, pencil scratching late into the night. 2 weeks before the competition, another unexpected twist struck. The organizers called Denise with news. Due to security concerns, the woman on the line said politely, "There may be additional measures in place at the event. We want to ensure everyone feels safe." Denise frowned. "You mean you're worried about my son?" "Well," the pause stretched. "There have been complaints. Some parents don't think he should be competing. They've raised concerns about fairness." "Fairness?" Denise snapped. "My son earned his spot. If they can't handle that, that's their problem." Malik, listening from the other room, felt the air go heavy around him. Fairness had never been on his side, and now even his rightful place was under siege. The last week before the competition was a blur of tension. Malik's mind carried the formulas easily, but his body was weighed down by the constant pressure. Even as he solved problem after problem, he wondered, would it be enough? Not enough to win, but enough to silence the voices, to make them see. The night before the competition, Malik sat at the table with Denise. She placed her hand over his. "Tomorrow isn't just about winning," she said softly. "It's about standing, about showing them they can't erase you." Malik nodded, though his heart pounded with fear. Later that night, as he packed his bag with pencils, notebooks, and neatly folded clothes, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. But just as he zipped the bag, he noticed something strange. One of his practice notebooks, the one filled with weeks of equations and worked-out problems, was missing. He tore through his room, checked under the bed, searched the living room. It was gone. Panic gripped him. That notebook wasn't just paper. It was his preparation, his strategy, his lifeline, and without it, the competition felt impossible. On the eve of the competition, Malik discovered something that threatened to end his chances before he even began. The morning of the competition arrived gray and heavy, as though the sky itself bore the weight Malik carried in his chest. His missing notebook haunted him. He had searched every corner of the apartment until sunrise, but it hadn't turned up. Whether it was stolen from his locker at school or misplaced somewhere between exhaustion and panic, it didn't matter. The preparation he had poured himself into was gone. Denise noticed the dark circles under his eyes as he adjusted his tie in the mirror. "Baby," she whispered, her hand resting on his shoulder. That notebook wasn't your genius. It was only paper. Everything you need is already in you. Malik nodded slowly, though doubt clawed at his insides. He carried his bag to the car with trembling hands, every step reminding him of what was at stake. The competition hall was larger than he expected. Rows of chairs filled with parents, teachers, and reporters curved toward the elevated stage. The air buzzed with chatter, the kind that grew sharper when Malik walked in. He felt the stares before he even reached his seat. Some curious, some disapproving, some laced with open hostility. He overheard fragments. "That's the viral kid. Watch. It's all hype. They'll probably let him win just for the story." Each word was a blade. Malik sat down, forcing himself to breathe. On stage, the judges adjusted their glasses and whispered to one another, papers shuffling in their hands. Malik noticed how their eyes lingered on him just a second too long, as if they weren't looking at a competitor but at a controversy. Miss Carter leaned over from the row behind him, whispering, "Don't let them define this moment for you. You define it." The competition began. The first round of problems flashed on the screen above the stage. Malik's pencil flew across the page, his mind falling into rhythm. Equations unraveled like thread, each solution sharpening his focus. For a brief moment, the noise faded. It was just him and the numbers again, the only space where truth remained unshaken. But the silence broke when one of the judges leaned into his microphone. "Competitor 4, he said, his voice directed at Malik. "Please explain your process aloud for this question." None of the other students had been asked to do this. The request wasn't about fairness. It was about suspicion. Malik swallowed hard. His voice wavered at first, but then grew steadier as he walked through each step, laying his logic bare. The audience murmured, some impressed, others dissatisfied that their doubts hadn't been confirmed. Round after round, the pressure mounted. Malik's hands ached from gripping his pencil, sweat dampening the edges of his paper. He could feel the weight of history pressing on him, not just his own life, but the generations of black students who had been told classrooms like this weren't for them. When he glanced into the crowd, he saw Denise in the second row, her hands clasped tightly in prayer. He saw children from his neighborhood, eyes wide with hope, and he realized the stage was bigger than him. Every number he solved wasn't just for himself, it was for them. The third round brought the unexpected twist. Malik's missing notebook suddenly reappeared, clutched in the hands of one of his competitors, a boy from a nearby private school. The boy smirked when their eyes met. Malik's chest tightened as he realized the truth. Someone had taken it to sabotage him, but the plan had backfired. The boy raised his hand, trying to hand the notebook to a judge. "Found this backstage," he said, voice dripping with false innocence. "Thought it looked useful." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The implication was clear. Malik might have cheated. The judge frowned, flipping through the notebook before returning it to Malik's desk. "These are practice problems, nothing from today's competition." But the seed of doubt had already been planted in the audience. Malik could feel it in the way people shifted in their seats, their whispers sharper than ever. Even when cleared of wrongdoing, suspicion clung to him like smoke. Denise's jaw tightened in the audience, but she stayed silent, knowing any outburst would be twisted against him. Malik forced himself to refocus, his pencil scratching furiously across the page. His mind screamed with anger, at the theft, at the lies, at the way brilliance always had to fight through a wall of doubt before it was even acknowledged. But he pressed, because surrender would only confirm what they wanted to believe. By the time the final round began, sweat dripped down his temples, his hands shaking. The air in the hall was suffocating. The moderator's voice echoed. "And now the last problem." The screen lit up with an equation unlike any Malik had ever seen before. Complex, layered, almost designed to break them. Gasps filled the hall, even from some of the judges. Malik's heart pounded. He knew in that instant that this wasn't just the hardest question of the day. It was a question loaded with meaning. If he failed, the whispers would become truth. He wasn't ready. He didn't belong. He was a fraud. He gripped his pencil, staring at the problem as if it were staring back. His mind raced, reaching through every scrap of knowledge he had gathered. It wasn't just numbers anymore. It was identity. It was belonging. It was survival. The hall fell silent. Every eye was on him. And as Malik pressed his pencil to the page, he realized something terrifying. This last problem wasn't just about his future. It was about the pride of his entire community, every person who had ever been silenced or doubted. But when the final problem appeared, It wasn't only Malik's future at stake, it was his entire community's pride. The final problem had wrung Malik dry. But when he placed his pencil down and looked at the solution glowing back at him, something inside him steadied. His answer was right. He knew it as surely as he knew his own name. For a heartbeat, the room was frozen in that fragile stillness, where history feels suspended, waiting for judgment. Then the judges conferred in hurried whispers, pens scratching furiously against paper. The audience leaned forward, breaths held, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Finally, the head judge rose and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice deliberate, "we have reviewed the solutions. The highest score of the competition belongs to competitor 4, Malik Johnson." For a moment, silence held its grip. Then applause erupted, some of it genuine, some hesitant, some reluctant. Denise shot to her feet, tears streaking her cheeks, clapping until her palms burned. Miss Carter stood too, her eyes shining with pride. A group of neighborhood kids cheered wildly, their voices echoing through the hall. But beneath the applause was a ripple of unease. Malik could see it in the judge's eyes, in the murmurs among the organizers, in the way some parents folded their arms instead of clapping. He had won, but his victory hadn't erased their disbelief. It had only unsettled it. When Malik stepped off the stage, cameras immediately swarmed. Reporters shoved microphones at him, their questions rapid fire. "How does it feel to prove everyone wrong? Do you think your teacher was misunderstood? Some say this was staged. What's your response?" Malik blinked against the flashes, his throat tightening. He wanted to speak, to tell them what it really felt like, but the words clogged behind his teeth. Before he could answer, Miss Harrington, the principal, slipped into the frame, placing a hand on his shoulder. "We at Roosevelt High are incredibly proud of Malik," she said smoothly. "This is what happens when teachers challenge students to reach their potential." Malik's stomach turned. Challenge? That wasn't what had happened. Whitman hadn't challenged him. He had mocked him. But here was his principal, spinning the story in front of cameras, stealing the narrative before Malik could claim it for himself. Reporters scribbled, nodding, swallowing her words whole. Malik felt invisible all over again, even as the cameras pointed straight at him. Behind him, Whitman appeared too, his face arranged into a mask of pride. "I always knew Malik had potential," he said to one reporter. "Sometimes it takes a push." The audacity of it made Malik's chest burn. The man who had set him up for humiliation was now using his triumph as proof of his own mentorship. Denise pushed forward, fury in her eyes, but Miss Carter held her back. "Not now," she whispered. "Not like this." The school wasted no time taking credit. By the next morning, the official website carried a banner, "Roosevelt High Student Shines at Regional Competition." The article praised the school's culture of excellence and Whitman's dedication to pushing students. Malik's name appeared, but buried beneath the glowing language about the institution that had tried to erase him. Denise slammed her laptop shut when she saw it. "They're rewriting everything," she said bitterly. "They're trying to erase the truth again."
Miss Carter agreed. "That's what they do. They bury the pain and claim the glory."
Meanwhile, Whitman's defenders came crawling out of the woodwork. Online, former students wrote glowing comments about how he had changed their lives. A parent wrote an op-ed arguing that good teachers sometimes get misunderstood in this era of cancel culture. They painted him not as a bully, but as a misunderstood educator who had simply pushed too hard. And through it all, Malik's name remained caught in the crossfire. Strangers debated his worth endlessly. "He's brilliant, undeniable." "No, he's being used as a pawn." "Whitman deserves credit. That kid would have been nothing without him." Malik scrolled through the words late at night, feeling his chest tighten until it was hard to breathe. His victory had been real, but it no longer belonged to him. It belonged to institutions, to narratives, to people who twisted the story into something easier to digest. Denise noticed his silence, the way he sat hunched at the table after dinner, staring at his untouched plate. "Talk to me," she urged gently. "They're using me," he whispered. "Like I'm not even a person. Like I'm just a symbol." Her heart ached. "Baby, you are more than a symbol." But symbols scare people. They'll either worship you or try to break you. Either way, they don't see you. Malik's fists clenched. "Then maybe I need to make them see me." The twist came at the press conference held the next week. The school organized it to celebrate Malik's achievement. Reporters filled the library, Cameras flashing, the stage decorated with banners of Roosevelt High's logo. Malik sat at the center, Denise at his side, Whitman and Harrington flanking him. The principal began with her usual polished lines, painting the story as one of inspired teaching and resilient learning. Whitman added his own, insisting he had always believed in Malik. And then a reporter turned directly to Malik. "What do you think, Malik? Do you agree with your teacher and principal's version of events?"
The room fell silent, all eyes on him. Malik felt Denise's hand tighten on his knee, Miss Carter's gaze urging him from the crowd. He opened his mouth, then closed it, his throat dry.
In that moment, he knew he had two choices. He could let the school continue rewriting the story, turning him into a prop in their version of events. Or he could tell the truth, raw and unfiltered, knowing it would unleash a storm he might not survive. The cameras leaned in, waiting. Reporters poised their pens. Whitman's smile froze, brittle around the edges. Malik took a deep breath, his heart hammering. And as cameras flashed and reporters shouted, Malik had to choose between staying a symbol or reclaiming his own voice. The library press conference ended in a blur of flashing lights, nervous glances, and a decision Malik wasn't sure he had fully made, until the words left his mouth. He had chosen truth over silence, defiance over safety, and once he spoke it, once he told the world what had really happened in that classroom, there was no turning back. The backlash was immediate, louder than applause. Some hailed him as brave, finally speaking against the polished lies of his school. Others attacked him viciously, calling him ungrateful, disruptive, divisive. Whitman, red-faced, denied everything, claiming Malik had twisted the story for attention. The principal doubled down, insisting the incident had been misinterpreted. The school's lawyers circled like vultures, trying to intimidate Denise into silence. And yet, despite the storm, something powerful shifted. Malik's voice, once ignored, once dismissed, was being heard. Not just by the reporters in the room, but by students in other schools, by parents who had been silenced, by communities who had long carried the same scars. His truth wasn't just his anymore. It was a mirror reflecting a wider reality. Weeks later, Malik found himself standing once again in the same classroom where it had all begun. The desks were in their usual rows, the air still faintly smelling of dry erase markers. The chalkboard loomed at the front, clean and waiting, but everything felt different. He wasn't the same boy who had once sat invisible in the middle row, head down, trying not to be noticed. He was someone who had been dragged into the light, bruised by it, but unbroken. The class buzzed with low chatter as Malik walked in. Some students stared, others whispered, a few smiled faintly. Even Whitman was there, his polished mask cracked beyond repair, though still clinging desperately to authority. For a moment Malik stood at the back, his chest tight with memory. He could almost hear the laughter from that day, ringing in his ears. He could see the chalk in his trembling hand, the smirk on Whitman's face, the way silence had swallowed the room when he dared to solve the problem. But this time, there was no laughter, no setup, only the quiet recognition that something irreversible had happened. Whitman cleared his throat, trying to maintain composure. "Johnson," he said stiffly, "would you like to—" "No," Malik interrupted, his voice steady, calm, but cutting. "Not this time. I'm not here for your performance." The words hung in the air, sharp and final. A ripple moved through the class. Some students exchanged glances. Others straightened in their seats. For the first time, Malik wasn't reacting to Whitman. He was setting the terms. He walked to the chalkboard anyway, picking up a piece of chalk, not because Whitman told him to, but because he chose to. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote 3 words across the board. "I belong here." The room went silent. Not the silence of mockery, but the silence of recognition. Malik set the chalk down, turning to face his peers. "This started as a joke," he said quietly, his voice carrying enough force to reach every corner of the room. "But it isn't funny anymore. Not for me. Not for anyone who's ever been told they don't belong." No one laughed. No one smirked. Whitman shifted uncomfortably at his desk, his authority evaporating under the weight of Malik's words. The power had shifted, not with shouting, not with violence, but with truth. When Malik left the classroom that day, the hallway felt different too. Students didn't just look at him, they moved aside, some nodding in quiet respect, others simply watching thoughtful. He wasn't invisible anymore. At home that evening, Denise wrapped her arms around him, her tears soaking his shoulder. You've already won, she whispered. Not because of trophies or headlines, but because you showed them what they tried to hide. Malik nodded, though a part of him still felt the ache of the battle. He knew the world wouldn't stop testing him. He knew there would be more Whitmans, more institutions eager to twist truth into lies. But he also knew something else. He didn't need their permission anymore. He had proven, to himself and to everyone watching, that he could excel, that he could shine, even under the weight of ridicule and doubt. The cruel joke had become a turning point, a movement, a reminder that brilliance couldn't be buried, no matter how many hands tried to press it down. And as Malik stared at his reflection in the window that night, city lights glowing faintly behind him, he asked himself a question that refused to leave his mind. If one boy mocked into silence could shift the room just by daring to solve a problem, how many other Maliks were out there, silenced before they were ever seen? Stories like this don't just happen in movies. They happen every day, often unseen, often denied. One wrong look, one false assumption, and a life can be shattered in seconds. So let me ask you, if you were standing there, watching this unfold, what would you have done? And if it happened to you, what would you want someone to say? Comment your answer below. Share this story so more people can face the truth. And let's see if together, we can stop silence from protecting injustice.